The cameras captured their tears. The audience felt their passion. Critics praised their brilliance. But there was one performance these actors never gave, the performance of living as themselves. For decades, Hollywood demanded silence from its black actors, especially those who loved differently. Being gay wasn't just a secret, it was a threat to survival in an industry that barely made room for them in the first place. Some carried relationships for decades in complete darkness. Others watched their names appear in gossip columns while never speaking a single word of truth. And all of them took that truth to their graves, leaving behind legacies built on extraordinary talent and unbearable silence. This is the story of 13 black actors who gave everything to their art, except the freedom to be themselves. If stories like these matter to you, hit that subscribe button now. These untold histories deserve to be remembered, and there are so many more waiting to be told. Paul Winfield, the actor who loved in silence. Paul Winfield's face told stories without words. In Sounder, he embodied a father's quiet strength. In Star Trek II, he brought dignity to every scene. Critics noticed. The Academy noticed. But what they didn't see was the man behind the performances. A man who spent over 20 years with a partner he could never acknowledge publicly. Paul understood the cost of truth in Hollywood. Being black already limited his opportunities. Being openly gay would have eliminated them entirely. So he built two lives, one under the spotlight, celebrated and respected, another in private, where love existed behind closed doors and careful silence. Friends knew, close colleagues understood. But Paul never spoke about it in interviews, never brought his partner to premieres, never allowed the public to see the complete picture of who he was. He watched other actors receive praise for their bachelor lifestyles while knowing that the same language was code, a shield protecting secrets the industry refused to accept. When roles came, he took them gratefully, pouring his truth into characters since he couldn't express it as himself. After Paul died in 2004, the details finally emerged. Publications mentioned his long-term relationship. People who'd worked with him shared memories they'd kept private for years. His legacy became fuller, more honest, but also more heartbreaking. Paul Winfield gave audiences powerful performances that still resonate today, yet he never got to experience the simple freedom of holding his partner's hand in public without fear. Howard Rollins. Brilliance dimmed by silence. Howard Rollins had everything Hollywood claimed to want. Talent that made casting directors scramble, screen presence that commanded attention, a nomination for Best Supporting Actor before he turned 30. His role in Ragtime should have launched him into superstardom. His work on In the Heat of the Night proved he could carry a television series. But Howard carried something else too, a secret that grew heavier with each passing year, pressing down until other cracks began to show. He was gay, and that reality terrified him in an industry that had no patience for it. The 1980s and 1990s offered no safe harbor for black actors who deviated from strict masculine ideals. So Howard stayed silent, even as rumors circulated, even as whispers followed him from set to set. The pressure mounted. He turned to substances that promised temporary relief. Legal troubles followed. Arrests made headlines. Each incident became another mark against him, another reason for producers to look elsewhere, another weight on shoulders already burdened by hiding. People watched his career stumble and wondered why such talent was self-destructing. They didn't see the exhaustion of maintaining a facade, the loneliness of keeping love hidden, the impossibility of being celebrated publicly while denying yourself privately. Howard's struggles weren't separate from his silence. They were consequences of it. When he died in 1996, at just 46 years old, the truth finally surfaced in obituaries and retrospectives. But by then, it was too late for Howard to experience the relief of living openly or the career he might have had if the world had been different. Raymond St. Jacques, the pioneer who couldn't be himself. Raymond St. Jacques made history simply by existing on screen. At a time when black actors were mostly relegated to stereotypes or background roles, he appeared in primetime television series and major films, carrying himself with sophistication that challenged every narrow expectation. His performance in Cotton Comes to Harlem showcased his range. His television appearances in Rawhide and other shows broke barriers. Industry insiders recognized him as someone special, an actor who could do more if given the chance. But Raymond knew the chances would disappear if anyone discovered he was gay. Hollywood's limited tolerance for black actors came with strict conditions: project strength, embody masculinity, never complicate the narrative. Being openly gay would complicate everything. So Raymond created a persona, dignified, reserved, entirely focused on craft. Interviews stayed professional. Personal questions received polite deflections. He built a wall between his public image and his private reality, maintaining it with discipline that became second nature. Within certain circles, whispers circulated. People made assumptions. But Raymond never confirmed anything, never gave the industry ammunition to use against him. He watched other actors face consequences for living openly and understood his survival depended on staying hidden. The cost was isolation, the constant vigilance of guarding every word, every gesture, every relationship. When Raymond died in 1990, obituaries celebrated his groundbreaking career without mentioning his sexuality. Even in death, the silence continued. His story reflects how progress in one area, racial representation, could coexist with oppression in another, forcing pioneers to choose which parts of themselves to reveal and which to bury forever. Luther Vandross, the voice that never said the words. Luther Vandross's voice could break hearts with a single note. Songs like Never Too Much and Here and Now became the soundtrack to millions of love stories. But Luther's own love story remained locked away, protected by carefully constructed privacy and deliberate misdirection. Though primarily known as a singer, Luther's television appearances and small acting roles brought him into Hollywood's sphere where the same pressures applied. Interviewers would ask about marriage, about family, about romance. Luther would smile and redirect, turning questions into jokes or shifting topics with practiced ease. Behind the charm and the music, Luther lived as a gay man who never felt safe enough to share that truth publicly. In the music industry, particularly in R&B and soul, maintaining a certain image was crucial. Female fans wanted to fantasize about him. Male fans needed to see him as someone they could relate to without discomfort. Being openly gay threatened all of it. Luther feared his sexuality would overshadow his artistry, that discussions would shift from his music to his personal life, that the work he'd spent decades perfecting would become secondary to something he couldn't control. Those closest to Luther knew. Friends understood the relationships he kept private. But the public saw only what he allowed, a talented, charming performer who simply chose to stay single. The weight of that choice wore on him, contributing to struggles with weight, health, and the emotional toll of hiding. When Luther passed in 2005, tributes flooded in, celebrating his musical legacy. But conversations about his sexuality remained speculation until later confirmations emerged. Luther Vandross gave the world his voice, his passion, his gift. But he never got to say the simple truth of who he loved. Moses Gunn, the character actor's hidden truth. Moses Gunn possessed the kind of presence that made every scene better. His deep, authoritative voice and commanding physicality made him unforgettable in films like Shaft and Ragtime. Theater directors sought him out. Film directors recognized his ability to elevate any role. Critics praised his range. But Moses lived with a division between public perception and private reality that defined his entire career. He was gay, but that truth never appeared in interviews, publicity materials, or public conversations. During his active years in Hollywood, the industry offered no tolerance for such revelations, especially from black actors who were already fighting for limited opportunities. Moses understood the mathematics. Being black meant fewer roles. Being openly gay would mean none. So he constructed a professional persona that revealed nothing about his personal life. Colleagues admired his dedication to craft, but noticed the barriers he maintained around anything personal. Moses spoke about acting, about theater, about the roles that challenged him. He did not speak about relationships, about love, about the life he lived away from sets and stages. The silence became so complete that many who worked with him for years knew nothing about who he truly was. That protective wall kept him working, but it also kept him isolated, performing not just on screen but in every interaction. When Moses died in 1993, obituaries focused entirely on his artistic contributions. His sexuality went unmentioned, remaining hidden even after death. The silence surrounding his truth demonstrates how deeply internalized the fear of exposure became. How many talented actors carried secrets that shaped their entire existence, while audiences saw only the performances they chose to share. Jimmy Daniels, the Harlem Renaissance star's double life. Jimmy Daniels embodied elegance during the Harlem Renaissance. His cabaret performances drew crowds who came to hear his smooth vocals and witness his polished stage presence. He moved through the artistic circles of the 1920s and 1930s, befriending writers, musicians, and performers who were reshaping American culture. Audiences saw sophistication and charm. But Jimmy carried a truth that would have destroyed his career if spoken aloud in that era. He was gay, living in a time when such revelations could end not just professional opportunities, but personal safety. The early 20th century offered black artists limited space to exist in mainstream culture. The Harlem Renaissance created a haven, but even within that creative explosion, certain truths remained dangerous. Jimmy crafted an image that fit expectations, a suave entertainer who dazzled audiences while keeping his romantic life completely private. Within artistic communities, some knew. Certain circles operated with unspoken understandings, creating pockets of acceptance that couldn't extend to public life. But Jimmy never spoke openly about who he loved, never allowed interviews or publicity to touch that part of himself. He built friendships with influential figures who respected his privacy, while the broader public remained entirely unaware. His career spanned decades, from the height of the Harlem Renaissance through the mid-20th century. He adapted to changing times, maintained his elegance, and continued performing. But the hiding never stopped. When Jimmy died in 1984, mainstream accounts of his career ignored his sexuality entirely. His story reflects the harsh bargain earlier generations faced: achieve in public while erasing essential parts of yourself from the record, leaving behind brilliance shadowed by necessary silence. Tommy Lane, the tough guy who couldn't reveal his truth. Tommy Lane built his career playing street-smart characters in the 1970s, blaxploitation era, and action films like Live and Let Die. His on-screen persona radiated toughness and edge, exactly what those roles demanded. Casting directors saw him as reliable for parts requiring masculine energy and urban authenticity. Audiences bought the image completely. But behind the tough exterior, Tommy carried a secret that contradicted everything his career depended on projecting. He was gay, and in the hyper-masculine world of action films and blaxploitation cinema, that truth would have ended his career immediately. The genre demanded specific images: strength, heterosexuality, dominance. Tommy's roles required him to embody those qualities convincingly. Being openly gay would have made him unemployable in the exact films that gave him work and recognition. So Tommy created separation, total separation, between his professional image and his private life. He spoke about his craft, about stunts, about working with other actors. He did not speak about relationships or personal matters. The performance of masculinity became constant, extending from the screen into every public appearance and interview. Those close to him may have known the truth, but Tommy ensured it never reached the industry or the public. His career continued through the decades, with television roles sustaining him beyond his film work. When Tommy died in 2021, tributes remembered his memorable character roles and his contributions to a specific era of cinema. But his sexuality remained largely unknown, hidden through decades of careful privacy. Tommy Lane's story adds another name to the long list of actors who felt the industry left them no choice but silence. Men who played strong characters while feeling unable to show their own strength in living authentically. Geoffrey Holder, the artist who kept love. Private. Geoffrey Holder was impossible to ignore. Standing 6 feet 6 inches tall with a booming voice and flamboyant presence, he commanded attention in everything he did. As Baron Samedi in Live and Let Die, he was unforgettable. As a dancer, choreographer, and director of Broadway's The Wiz, he revolutionized how audiences experienced performance. His artistry spilled across disciplines: painting, costume design, theatrical direction. Critics celebrated his creative genius. Audiences adored his larger-than-life persona. But Geoffrey kept his personal life carefully guarded despite his public flamboyance. He was gay, though he never openly embraced that truth in public conversations. In an industry restrictive both racially and socially, Geoffrey focused on his artistry, allowing his work to speak while his private world remained silent. Interviews explored his creative process, his inspirations, his theatrical vision. They did not explore his romantic life or personal relationships. Geoffrey's flamboyant style led some to assume or speculate, but assumptions and truth are different things. He never confirmed, never denied, never made his sexuality part of public discourse. The careful separation protected his career while creating a divide between who he appeared to be and who he actually was. His marriage to dancer Carmen de Lavallade became his public narrative, a relationship that may have been genuine in its own way while also serving as protection from questions about other aspects of his life. When Geoffrey passed in 2014, tributes honored his creative contributions across multiple artistic fields. Few mentioned the truth he'd carried privately. Geoffrey Holder gave the world extraordinary art, color, movement, and beauty that pushed boundaries. Yet he never had the chance to live openly as his complete self. Another brilliant artist denied full authenticity by an unforgiving era. Juano Hernandez, the pioneer's painful silence. Juano Hernandez broke barriers that others only dreamed of touching. As an Afro-Puerto Rican actor, he faced double prejudice in 1940s Hollywood. Yet his performance in Intruder in the Dust in 1949 earned critical acclaim and opened doors previously locked to black actors. He brought dignity to roles that others might have reduced to stereotypes. His presence on screen challenged racist assumptions. Directors recognized his talent. Critics praised his work. But Juano carried a secret that would have destroyed everything he'd built. He was gay, living in mid-20th century America, where such truth meant professional suicide and potentially physical danger. For a black actor already fighting racial prejudice, being openly gay would have ended not just his Hollywood career, but likely his ability to work anywhere in American entertainment. Juano chose silence, presenting himself as entirely focused on craft. Interviews discussed his approach to roles, his thoughts on the industry, his hopes for better opportunities for black actors. They never touched his personal life, never explored relationships, never asked the questions that might have forced difficult answers. He maintained an image of privacy that protected him while keeping his authentic self completely hidden. His international work in films gave him broader opportunities, but the hiding remained constant regardless of location. When Juano died in 1970, obituaries celebrated his groundbreaking career without mentioning his sexuality. His story reflects the painful reality of pioneers who opened doors professionally while feeling forced to close doors personally, advancing representation while hiding essential truths, breaking some barriers while others remained firmly in place, leaving legacies of both progress and profound personal sacrifice. Bayard Rustin, the activist who performed silence. Bayard Rustin is remembered primarily as the strategic genius behind the 1963 March on Washington, but he was also a performer and actor during his lifetime. His passion for theater and music gave him a presence beyond politics. His voice carried authority. His stage presence commanded attention. But Bayard's life required performances of a different kind, the constant performance of hiding who he truly was. Bayard was gay at a time when that truth brought immense danger, particularly for a black man in public life. His activism made him visible, which meant his personal life became a target. Opponents of civil rights frequently attacked his sexuality to discredit his work and undermine the causes he served. Bayard understood that openness would not only harm his career, but would be weaponized against the movement itself, giving segregationists ammunition to dismiss the entire struggle for equality. So he kept his truth private, never addressing it publicly, even though friends and allies were aware. His artistry and activism defined his public image, while his personal reality remained hidden. The cost was enormous: constant vigilance, watching every word, knowing that exposure could destroy not just his own work, but potentially set back causes that affected millions. Theater and music provided outlets for expression, spaces where he could channel emotion without revealing its source. But the freedom to simply exist as himself, to love openly, to live without fear, that freedom remained impossible. When Bayard died in 1987, the world celebrated his contributions while leaving his personal truth largely unaddressed. His story shows how many black performers and public figures had to choose between authenticity and survival, between truth and effectiveness, sacrificing personal freedom for larger causes while carrying unbearable private burdens. Alvin Ailey, the choreographer's hidden heart. Alvin Ailey changed dance forever. His American dance theater brought modern dance to millions. His choreography captured the black experience with beauty and power that transcended words. Pieces like Revelations became timeless masterworks. But before his choreographic genius made him legendary, Alvin worked as an actor, appearing on stage and screen, bringing the same emotional intensity to performance that would later define his dances. Throughout his career, Alvin was a gay man who never openly shared that truth. In mid-20th century America, being openly gay meant devastating consequences, especially for a black artist already facing racism and limited opportunity. Alvin poured himself into his art instead, creating dances that explored identity, struggle, faith, and resilience. Many believe his hidden personal life fueled his creative intensity. The emotions he couldn't express in life manifested in movement that spoke universal languages of pain and joy. But the hiding came at enormous cost. Alvin avoided discussing relationships, deflected personal questions, maintained strict boundaries between his public and private selves. Interviews focused on his artistic vision while his personal loneliness grew. He created beauty that moved millions while feeling unable to share the complete truth of who he was with those same millions who celebrated him. Friends knew. Close colleagues understood. But the public received only what he chose to reveal: a brilliant artist entirely devoted to dance. When Alvin died in 1989 from AIDS-related illness, his sexuality was not widely discussed initially. Obituaries focused on artistic achievements. Only later did fuller accounts emerge, revealing the truth he'd kept hidden. Alvin Ailey's legacy lives through movements that continue to inspire, but his story also reminds us of the silence that shadowed even the most celebrated black artists of his generation. Billy Strayhorn, the composer who loved Duke Ellington's world. Billy Strayhorn's name is inseparable from jazz history, though many don't realize he also performed as an actor in theatrical productions during his career. As Duke Ellington's composing partner, Billy created some of jazz's most enduring pieces, including Take the A Train. His sophisticated compositions reflected deep musicality and emotional complexity. But Billy's personal life remained carefully hidden from public view throughout his career. He was openly gay within jazz circles, living more authentically than many of his contemporaries in that particular community. But to the broader public and mainstream media, Billy remained enigmatic, rarely interviewed, seldom photographed outside of professional contexts. His relationship with Duke Ellington's orchestra provided both opportunity and protection. He could create freely while remaining somewhat shielded from harsh public scrutiny that would have come from more mainstream visibility. Still, the hiding took forms. Billy couldn't bring romantic partners to public events. His relationships remained confined to private spaces. When mainstream publications mentioned him, they focused solely on his musical genius, never acknowledging the complete person behind the compositions. The jazz world's relative tolerance created a pocket of acceptance, but that tolerance had limits and certainly didn't extend to open celebration of his identity. Billy's talent deserved wider recognition during his lifetime, but increased visibility would have meant increased exposure of his personal life. The compromise left him somewhat in the shadows, appreciated by those who knew, unknown to millions who loved his music without knowing his name. When Billy died in 1967, obituaries in jazz publications acknowledged his truth with more honesty than mainstream sources would have dared. His story shows how even relatively progressive artistic communities still demanded silence from their gay members when facing the broader public. Willi Ninja, the dancer who walked Vogue's edge. Willi Ninja brought voguing from underground ballrooms to mainstream consciousness, appearing in the documentary Paris is Burning and working as both a dancer and actor. His performances challenged gender norms and celebrated ballroom culture's creativity. Willi moved through worlds that seemed more accepting. The New York ballroom scene embraced LGBTQ identities in ways mainstream society refused. Yet even Willi, who lived more openly than most on this list, faced pressures to hide certain truths depending on context. Within ballroom culture, Willi was celebrated. In downtown New York's artistic communities, his queerness was visible and valued. But when crossing into mainstream entertainment, different rules applied. Acting roles and mainstream dance opportunities required navigation of industry prejudices that remained firmly in place despite cultural changes beginning to emerge in the 1980s and 1990s. Willi's story differs from earlier generations in that he lived more openly, participated in work that explicitly celebrated queer culture, and became an icon within LGBTQ communities. Yet he still faced limitations when interfacing with mainstream Hollywood and commercial entertainment. Opportunities that should have been abundant, given his talent, remained restricted because of who he was. Interviews handled his sexuality with either exoticization or discomfort, rather than simple acceptance. When Willi died in 2006, the ballroom community mourned one of their greatest pioneers. Mainstream obituaries acknowledged his contributions to dance and popular culture, but often framed his queerness as peripheral rather than central to understanding his artistry. Willi Ninja represents a transitional moment, more open than previous generations, but still facing significant barriers, celebrated in some spaces while marginalized in others, building bridges toward fuller acceptance while still experiencing the costs of being different in an industry slow to change. 13 stories. 13 lives of extraordinary talent. 13 men who gave audiences unforgettable performances while keeping essential truths locked away. They carried secrets not from shame, but from necessity, understanding that the industry they served would reject them entirely if they dared to live openly. These actors broke barriers on screen while feeling unable to break the barrier around their own hearts. They received applause for their work while hiding the love that sustained them in private. Their silence wasn't a weakness. It was survival in a system designed to force impossible choices: career or authenticity, success or truth, public celebration or private freedom. Each man on this list made sacrifices audiences never witnessed, carrying burdens that shaped their lives and sometimes shortened them. Their stories remind us that progress in representation doesn't automatically mean progress in acceptance, that some doors opened while others remained locked. Today, their legacies live in the performances they left behind, powerful, moving, unforgettable work that continues to inspire. But their stories also ask us to remember the cost of that work, the price of success in an unforgiving era, and the countless other untold stories still waiting to emerge from Hollywood's hidden history. How many more stories remain buried? How many more truths were taken to graves before anyone could hear them? If these hidden histories matter to you, subscribe now and share this video. These actors deserve to live fully. The least we can do is remember them completely.